Well, g'day. Welcome back to my channel. Currently under my English-born Australian parent-given name, 8th and 9th generation Aussie, mind you. I just thought I'd put that in, that my father, James, was the eldest of 5 from Thomas Edward Thatcher, otherwise known as Teddy, and my mother was the eldest born of 9 children to a beautiful, awesome science teacher who Bathurst fondly remembers as Elmo Lavis. So just thought I'd put that out there, that following the genealogy of both sides of my family, we have found no convict history either, mind you, and we've been traced back on one side to 8 generations and on the other to 9, and 9 the result, which is kind of cool because 8 and 9 adds up to 17, and 17 has always been like one of my favourite numbers for some reason or another. Couldn't tell you why. Maybe it's because I was born in the year 71, because 7, 1 and 17 in numerology both add up to 8, and 8 of course is one of those numbers of fate and destiny. And I didn't even come here to actually talk about the numbers of fate and destiny or my ancestry or anything of the sort. I actually came here to make another moon rant, because as a bona fide, genuine flat earther who understands this planar earth we live upon is flat and stationary, all the solid bits above water or sea level, it behooves me to have to be constantly arguing against both sides of this particular discussion. The frickin' moon. I mean, I've made multiple rants before on my channel, and I try to put them all into that playlist that the moon one. I'll have to. Cool, here comes another one. There's so many birds around at the moment. They're just flocking in. That's what birds do, they flock. Get the flock out of here. All those birds in the background you can hear, they're currawongs. Currawong. They usually come after it rains, so I don't know if that means it's gonna rain again. We could use a little bit. As much as that infuriates me after all the floods we've had, moving here to this little slice of paradise, a little bit of off-grid paradise, is I was hammered, hampered and inundated with freaking floods, and already after just a few weeks, yeah, we could use a little bit of rain, but hey, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. So, talking about the moon, which is really weird because it's the middle of the afternoon, and actually the moon would, if I had stepped out over there, the moon will actually be present at the moment. It's pretty well slightly past what they call a quarter moon, which means half full, because it means quarter of a month. The word month coming from moon, of course. And so when it was exactly half full, which I believe was yesterday, I'm not following it that closely, even though I just see it all the time. When it's exactly half full, a quarter moon either side. Now, because it's waxing, well, I mean at exactly midday, and I don't mean by the clock, I mean midday by the sun, because, you know, they're two different things. Midday by the sun means exactly when the sun's overhead, whereas hearing something rustling in the bushes over there. hope it's not a rat. A bit of noise. Anyway, where was I at? Oh, that's right. So actually, when the moon is at the quarter phase or half full, as I was trying to say, it would actually be directly overhead at sunset. That's the way the phases and so on work. Which is why then, because it takes about 50 minutes later each day for the moon to appear, that is why by the time the moon rises at sunset, it appears full to us. This is very straightforward flat earth cosmology about how and why we have the full moon. It's and this is one of the things that annoys me to have to say, because Dubé, Mr. Eric Dubé, he's done a lot of good things for raising flat earth awareness, but what he's utterly destroyed his own reputation with is by mentioning that the moon creates its own light and all the rest of this serious, utter nonsense. The moon is lit by the sun. It is as simple as that. That is why we have phases. So, pardon me, there's a lot of pollens and mold stuff around at the moment. If you ever hear any flat earther say the moon produces its own light, then you can dismiss them as an idiot. Okay, there, I've said it. If you're a flat earther who says that about the moon, you're an idiot. Please stop saying that. You're making us all look like idiots by association. The moon is lit by the sun. Now, it may well project that light into that upper atmosphere to be an apparent plasma ball. That I will grant you, but that does not mean that the moon's origin of light comes from itself, by itself. It is still illuminated by the sun. But the tides, now the tides are a different... I used the expression just yesterday, which is really silly, but I love using really silly expressions. It's an entirely different kettle of unicorns altogether. Because the moon rules the tides. But what it doesn't do is use gravitational mass or its own mass to pull the tides. That is ridiculous. You cannot pull water. Now, if I'd have thought about this beforehand, I would have got a glass of water. Like, beer is 95% water, or in this case, 5.8, so it's 94.2% water. But if you get a straw and put it between thine lips and bloweth upon a glasseth of water, then thou shalt see that it is very easy to repel the water with just a very fine or small amount of breath. However, if you put a thine straw between thine lips and hold it just above the surface of the water and suck, you will find that no matter how much thy sucketh, you will not disturb the water whatsoever. And yet the globe conventional belief of why we have tides is that the gravitational pull of the moon from over 200,000 miles away is sufficient to disturb trillions of tons of oceanic water and pull them towards the moon due to its gravitational mass. Now, bear in mind, there's only one moon. There's only one gravitational mass. Bear that in mind. And whilst bearing that in mind, be aware also that there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides in every day. I say day because it's in every moon day, by which I mean because the moon rises 50 minutes later every day, comes into view as it travels around the stationary planar Earth. The tides match the cycle of the moon's travel. It has virtually nothing to do with the sun. The sun has the tiniest little influence, which is pretty much because when it's balanced with the moon, either at a full moon where they're diametrically opposite each other, or at a new moon where they're basically together in the same place, the tides do have greater higher and greater lower variances. But that's just on the global scale, on the Earth scale, out of trillions and trillions of tons of water. That extra little 10 to 20 centimetres of tidal differences is still pretty well insignificant. It is there, I will grant you. On the full moon, especially during the equinoxes, that is when we have the greatest king tides. And that is because the sun and the moon are perfectly balanced from one another. And hence, their influences from either are somewhat greater than when they're sort of fighting against one another. But the sun itself virtually, as I say, has 0 to 0.1% impact on the tides. And that 0.1%, sure, it's significant, but it's insignificant in the overall scale of what causes the tides. Now, as I said, you cannot pull water. What you can do is repel water. And there is a force on the Earth that holds the moon aloft. And this force, for want of a better term, it's the best one I can find, is a weak diamagnetic force. And diamagnetism is basically, it's probably not the most correct term. Diamagnetism means basically there's a north and south pole to a magnet. Now, if you get a ball magnet, it will be attracted on one side and repelled from the other. So it has a sort of a north and south pole, as they say the Earth does. But if you get a whole bunch of ball magnets and stick them together, what you'll find is if you put, say, the north pole of a bar magnet towards it, it will stick. But if you then turn the bar magnet around and put the south pole towards it, you'd expect it to repel, but it doesn't. It still sticks. So diamagnetism basically means everything sticks regardless of its polar, whatever the word is, polar significance. I don't know. There's sure to be a word for it or a term. I haven't heard it yet. But what you will find then, if you take 2 bar magnets and you try and stick them together with either 2 south or 2 north poles facing towards one another, they repel each other, and they repel each other quite forcefully, to the point where if you're not holding on to them both, if you had them, say, sitting on a table and you push one towards the other one will swing around violently and come and stick together, so the opposites attract. That's where that saying actually comes from, is magnetism. Opposites attract because reasons. That's just magnets. Yeah. So when it comes to the moon, and I say a diamagnetic force holds it aloft, it's not technically the most correct explanation. It's almost like polar opposites. But we just don't really have the term for it. You know, try as we might. Whatever it is, it's a repulsive force that holds the moon aloft. We don't need it for the sun and the stars because they are on the other side of the firmament, which separates us from what they call waters above. Whether or not it's liquid water as we understand melted ice water down here on the earth is another thing. I sort of think it's more an etheric type of fluid substance of a higher vibration. Like, when you raise your voice an octave, it becomes higher, and if you raise another octave, it becomes higher. Well, I believe that the waters above are some variant of octaves above. Still, in a sense, water, but different frequency, different vibration. Hard to explain, and not what I'm here to talk about. I'm just here to talk about the tides. So basically, the force that holds the moon aloft. I use the term diamagnetic. No, it's not 100% correct. But let's just go with it and call it that for a moment. It's a repellent force. What holds it aloft as the moon travels around this side of the firmament is when it reaches the oceans, that force depresses down upon the salt water, which is full of electrolytes. If you know what electrolytes are, they're basically dissolved salts. And they can conduct electricity, hence they're called electrolytes. If we didn't have any salt in our bodies, we'd be dead, because we would have no function between our brain and our blood. There'd be no osmosis occurring. Electrolytes are vital to conductivity to send a message through. And so the saltwater oceans, which are very, very salty, I might add, as all my years of working in the aquarium industry have proven, is that in normal fresh water, you may add a teaspoon of salt to every 10 litres of water to make it safe for freshwater fish. If you were to turn that into brackish water, which is half the level of what seawater is, you need to add 15 teaspoons for every 10 litres. Now that's a lot of salt. So to turn it into salt water, obviously, double that again, it's 30 teaspoons per 10 litres. So that's how salty the ocean is. It is extremely salty compared to fresh water, which 1 teaspoon is very beneficial to the health and well-being of normal freshwater fish, like your goldfish and any other non-marine fish, basically. So because the oceans then are so salty, that means they are teeming with these electrolytes, and that is why the ocean reacts to this diamagnetic force of the moon, pushing it as the moon approaches. So as the moon approaches, the ocean gets repelled, but then in the meantime, what comes up behind it to fill that empty spot is going to be water returning. And so that will create a high tide after the low tide has been pushed away by the moon. And then the moon is pushing this high water away towards the next continental shelf or continent in its approach as it travels from the east to the west. And it pushes the secondary high tide, or it pushes their initial high tide towards that coast. But as the moon reaches that coast, it keeps on going, but the water can go no further. So the tide peaks, and then it starts flowing back again. Now by this time, the other tide has already started flowing back again, because it's what water does. It always wants to seek and find its level. But this backwash then goes and creates a second high tide back on the opposite coast. And then as it starts to recede again, the moon comes back around full circuit and starts pushing it even further, creating the second low tide of that 24-hour, 50-minute period. This is why we get 2 high and 2 low tides per day, or 24 hours, 50 minutes, on the flat and stationary planar Earth. Now on the globe, you don't get that, because they say it's gravitational pull from one mass of one moon. Now you try and think about this for a second. I mean, most people don't. They can't. It's incomprehensible to them. They just want to believe that the moon causes the tides and blah blah blah, gravity. Shut up and leave me alone, Flurf. But no, they will say that the gravitational pull of the moon, which, as I've already expressed, you cannot pull water, you can pull its container, or you can repel water. Repelling water is very easy. You only need a weak force to repel it. But to pull it, it's impossible. As I say, you can pull its container. Now, if the moon is pulling Earth, which is the container, towards it, with a sudden jerk or something, that might cause a bit of that splashback effect, like carrying a tray of water around. You know, you tilt it a little bit one way, the water tilting back the other way often splashes back at you, even though you're tilting it the other way. The splashback effect is often greater than the initial cause of the tilt. But for some reason in the globe, they say the pull of the moon pulls the tides. And then as they slosh around backwards and forwards after the moon pulls it back the other way. See, the only way that could work on the globe is you'd have one massive high tide, and then the opposite side of it would be a massive low tide. And you know how the globers get around this? This is no shit. This is what they actually will bona fide tell you causes the other high tide on the back side of the Earth compared to where the moon is. They will say that while the moon is pulling the oceans towards it, it also pulls the Earth through the oceans, creating another high tide bulge on the backside. I kid you not. This is what I have been told by globe heads. Genuinely believe that. Now, think about it for a second. First of all, if you're also pulling the Earth through the oceans, then that's going to negate the first high tide that the moon has pulled in the first place. And if you're going to be pulling the Earth through the oceans towards the moon is not going to keep its distance from the Earth for very long. And in fact, you know, because I love smashing globe-tarded stupid arguments, because I think I'm done smashing the tides. That alone is all it takes to prove we cannot be on a spinning ball in space with the moon causing the tides by the fact of gravitational pull from the moon pulling the oceans around. You get one massive, one low, but here, listen to this. They say that the moon orbits the Earth, and they say that the Earth orbits the sun. So the Earth orbiting the sun takes 365.25 days to make a full rotation right around the sun. So in one day, it hasn't quite gone a full degree, because there's 360 degrees in a circle. So it goes close to 1 degree of going around the sun every day as it does its little spin on its axis in exactly 24 hours. So in that 24-hour period, to go 1 degree around the sun, it has travelled 1,600,000 miles through space to go almost a degree. So that's almost a straight line of over 1.5 million miles. Now, the moon orbiting the Earth at about 1/5 of a million of miles, about 200 and something thousand miles away, apparently, in free fall, because of the Earth-Moon gravitational attraction to one another. It is said that we are pulling the moon with us as we travel 1.6 million miles daily. But it takes 27.3 days for the moon to travel around the Earth once, which it actually does backwards. It goes from west to east, believe it or not. That is why it takes 50 minutes longer each day, because that 50 minutes, if you work that out over 27.3 days, means that's why it comes back to where it started, going backwards around us compared to the actual rotation direction we go from east to west. I know. Even though it makes it look as though the sun and moon both rise in the east every day and set in the west, the moon is actually going backwards, the opposite direction to what it seems as though the sun is going. So, bear with me, this is going somewhere. So what this means is, as the Earth moves in that 27.3 days for a month, even though an actual moon cycle takes 29.4 days, it still takes 27.3 for the moon to actually go around us once. Globe maths is that basically half the time, well, not half, it's less than half. For a period of the time, the moon is going to be in front of the direction we're heading, orbiting around the sun. And half of that 27.3 day period later, you can do the maths on that, 27.3, that's a terrible number to split in half. Let's just say 14 days. It's on the back side of the Earth, and so in the 7-day periods it's on the sides of the Earth. Now the Earth is spinning, of course, every day. That's irrelevant here because we're talking about the orbit going around the sun. So the orbit at 66,600 miles per hour, continuous to go around the sun, so it comes back right around in 1 year, 365.25 days, means that for some period of that time the moon's in front, sometimes it's behind, other times it's either side. Yet the moon is only in free fall due to gravitational pull or attraction of one another to each other, irrespective of the sun. The moon don't give a fuck about the sun. It just does what it wants to do because it loves the Earth. It's still going to remain a constant distance from us, give or take a tiny little elliptical bit, but it's so irrelevant, it's meaningless. They say it's getting 3 centimeters further away every year. No shit, 3 centimeters? Yeah, right. But it means when the Earth is racing towards it at 66,600 miles per hour, it is repelling it, not attracting it, with the gravitational attractive force that pulls the tides around. And yet when the moon's behind us, it stays the same distance. And it's pulled towards us, and still doing exactly the same thing to the tides the whole time. So the Earth repels, attracts, keeps it clinging in free fall as we're hurtling through space, and we still have more or less constant tides, give or take 10, 20 centimeters per day, per tide, twice a day, in this heliocentric spinning bullshit nonsense. Now, if you believe that, I'm sorry, you're insane in the mainframe. The only way that is possible is if we have a stationary planet Earth where the land is all above the sea level. The moon goes around above us once every 24 hours, 50 minutes, and it's repelling the oceans, and the oceans are just flowing backwards and forwards in reaction to that repulsive force, which I've called diamagnetism. Excuse me, there's somebody loud going by. We cannot be going around the sun and have a moon at the same time. It simply is not possible, let alone 2 tides, 2 general tides every day, approximately 50 minutes later every day. So like you go out for a run down the beach at low tide and 7 in the morning. The next day, when you go for a run down the beach, the actual low tide will be about 7:50 or closer to 8 o'clock in the morning. And then the following day, 9 o'clock. So if you waited like 6 or 7 days and you went down at 7 a.m. at the same time they have a morning run, you'd find it, you'd be struggling a lot more through the soft sand up a high tide, because you're not running on the hard sand where the tide has receded and left the hard sand behind. This, I know, through a lifetime of experience of living near the beach. Not necessarily running all the time, but often riding a push bike or going surfing, swimming, or otherwise knowing that the low tide is the best time to try and walk around a particular headland, because there are certain places you just can't get across at a high tide. But if you time it right with the tides, you'll have a successful journey. So you're talking to somebody who knows tides, who knows the moon, and who knows we live on a stationary planet Earth. Take it easy. Talk to you next time.